All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring something that you hear pretty much constantly but might not realize how cool it is, and that is alliteration.
Yeah, alliteration. It's everywhere.
We've got some really fascinating sources here, and we're going to break them down for you so you can understand why alliteration works and where you can find it.
Exactly. Think of this as like a crash course in how to appreciate all the little things that make language so interesting.
Okay, so to kick things off, what exactly is alliteration?
Well, in the simplest terms, it's when you have a bunch of words close together and they all start with the same sound. It's like rhyming, but instead of the end of the word, it's at the beginning.
So the classic Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers kind of thing.
Precisely. That's the one everyone always remembers. And it's important to focus on the sound, not just the letter.
Right, like cat and kite alliterate because of that hard K sound, even though they're spelled differently.
Exactly. But cat and cell don't alliterate, even though they both start with the letter C. The sounds are different.
So it's all about what you hear, not just what you see. Now, do those words have to be right next to each other for it to count as alliteration?
Not necessarily. You can have other words in between, and it still works. Like in Peter Piper, you've got picked, peck, pickled, and peppers all spread out, but they're all connected by that strong P sound.
It's like a little sound bridge between the words. Okay, so now we know the basics, but it turns out there are different types of alliteration, right?
That's right. Our sources dive into that, and it gets really interesting. The most common one is consonant alliteration. That's when you have those consonant sounds repeating at the beginning of words.
Like, slippery snake slivered.
Perfect. That's a great example. You can really hear that S sound, almost like the snake itself. There's also big black bug, very punchy, or how about funny furry Frank?
Haha, yeah, Frank's definitely got some alliteration going on.
And we can't forget, Walter walked warily. That repeated W gives it a sense of caution, or Claire, close your cluttered closet,
Right.
really creates a vivid image.
So consonant alliteration can really create different moods or highlight certain words.
Exactly. And then there's vowel alliteration. This one's a bit trickier to spot sometimes because the letters might be different, but it's that initial vowel sound that matters.
Okay, so like Amazing American.
Yes. Both start with that short A sound, or eager eagle eats. That long E sound really ties those words together.
Alfred ate apples, too.
Precisely. And even in a more formal phrase like Owen obeyed Omar's orders, you can hear that vowel alliteration at work.
Now, our sources also mentioned some specific types of alliteration that I thought were really cool. One of them was sibilance.
Ah, yes, sibilance.
Yeah.
This one creates a really specific effect. It's when you repeat S or Z sounds.
Well, it's basically a subset of consonant alliteration, right?
You got it. Think of Sally sells seashells by the seashore.
Yeah, it's like that hissing, almost whispering sound. It's very evocative.
Ah, exactly. It can add a lot of texture and imagery to writing. And then there's plosive alliteration. This one's all about those strong, impactful sounds like P, B, T, D, K, and G.
So Peter Piper strikes again. Those P sounds really hit you hard.
Definitely. It can be quite dramatic. You can almost feel the force of the words.
Okay, so to recap for our listeners,
Mhm.
consonant alliteration, same consonant sound at the beginning. Vowel alliteration, same vowel sound. Sibilance is those hissing S, Z sounds.
Hmm.
And plosive alliteration is those big, bold sounds like P and B and all those.
Right. Think of them as like different colors on a painter's palette.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of palettes,
Yeah.
where do we see alliteration being used? Because I know it's not just in textbooks.
Oh, absolutely not. It's everywhere. You find it in poetry all the time. Poets use it to give their lines a musical quality, make them more interesting, more memorable.
I mean, think about Taylor Swift's Bad Blood, right? Because baby, now we got bad blood.
Mhm.
That B sound is so catchy.
Absolutely. Or that classic Peter Piper rhyme. It's practically all alliteration. And even in kids' poetry, like Shel Silverstein, I saw an old gnome.
Yeah. I loved this stuff as a kid.
That one's got a lot of repeated G and N sounds. It makes it so whimsical and fun to read.
And it's not just poetry. Alliteration pops up in stories, too.
Oh, yeah, especially children's books, and makes them more engaging for young readers, like, Silly Sally. That one's got S sounds all over the place. Silly Sally swiftly shooed 7 silly sheep.
It's like a tongue twister for kids.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's Dr. Seuss. He was the master of alliteration. Fox and socks? I mean, come on.
Classic. But what's really amazing is that alliteration isn't just limited to poems and stories. We use it in everyday speech all the time. Think about it. Pretty as a picture, Dead as a doornail, busy as a bee.
Home sweet home. Make a mountain out of a molehill, neck and neck, pleased as punch.
Right as rain, round robin, tough talk, trick or treat. It's just built into the way we speak.
It's like we're constantly using alliteration without even thinking about it, and that brings up a good question. Why do writers use it so much? I mean, what's the purpose?
Yeah, good point. It can't just be a coincidence.
Well, for one thing, it makes writing more interesting and enjoyable to read. It's like adding a little music to your words.
Yeah, and it makes things easier to remember, too, like those jingles and slogans we were talking about.
Exactly. Alliteration has this amazing ability to stick in your brain. It gives language, rhythm, flow, and it can even be used to emphasize certain words or ideas. Think about a writer using a bunch of those harsh plosive sounds together.
Like to create a sense of tension.
Exactly. Alliteration isn't just a decoration. It can be used very deliberately to create a certain mood or effect.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good understanding of alliteration now. We know what it is, what types there are, where we find it, and some of the reasons why writers use it. But there are a few more things I want to dig into. You mentioned those jingles and slogans earlier. That's a whole area where alliteration really shines.
Oh, absolutely. Advertisers love it. It's all about making their brand names and slogans catchy and memorable. I mean, just think of some of the big ones. Best Buy, Coca-Cola, Dunkin' Donuts, Krispy Kreme.
Yeah, you can't forget those names. And it's not just the names either, it's the slogans too. Like, maybe she's born with it, maybe it's Maybelline. That's a classic.
Yeah, those soft M sounds make it flow so smoothly. It's like a little piece of music for your ears.
Definitely. And of course, we've already talked about how alliteration is used in all kinds of famous literary works. But before we move on, I think it's worth spending a minute on tongue twisters. Why are those so hard to say?
Well, tongue twisters are specifically designed to be tricky to pronounce because of those repeated sounds, and alliteration plays a big role in that. They're a fun way to play with language and see how those sounds can trip us up, like, she sells seashells by the seashore.
Man, just trying to say that makes my tongue feel tangled.
It's all those S sounds. Or how about this one? How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
I don't even want to try that one.
Full of W and chi sounds, all designed to make you stumble.
All right, well, let's untangle our tongues and move on to some fun facts about alliteration.
Sounds good to me. Did you know the word alliteration itself comes from the Latin word littera, which means letter of the alphabet?
It's kind of ironic considering alliteration is more about the sound than the letter, right?
Exactly. But the term as we know it today didn't really come into use until around the 15th century.
Interesting. I didn't realize it had such a long history.
And in Old English poetry, alliteration was actually more important than rhyming. Think about Beowulf, that epic poem. It relied heavily on alliteration to give it structure and flow.
Wow, so it was more than just a decoration. It was like a fundamental part of the language.
Precisely. And I know we've said this a few times, but it bears repeating.
Mhm.
Alliteration is all about the sound, not the spelling. Like, funny phone is a perfect example. Different letters, but the same F sound.
Oh, that's a good one. I hadn't thought of that.
And it even pops up in character names. Think about Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Wonder Woman. That repetition just makes their names more memorable. And finally, consider how alliteration can influence the mood of a piece of writing. Those soft S sounds, like in Sally Sells Seashells, they can create a feeling of calm or even mystery.
It's like the sounds themselves can carry a certain emotion. Fascinating.
Absolutely. And speaking of questions, I know there are some common ones that come up about alliteration.
Yeah, let's clear up any confusion. What are some of the things people get tripped up on?
Well, one of the biggest misconceptions is that words have to start with the same letter to alliterate. As we've said, it's all about the initial sound. Cat and kite, alliteration. Cat and cell, not alliteration.
Got it. What about vowel sounds? Can they create alliteration?
Absolutely. We talked about that earlier. Amazing American, eager eagle eats, those are all examples of vowel alliteration.
Right. And another thing I've heard people ask is whether every word in a sentence has to alliterate.
No, not at all. You only need two or more words close together to create the effect.
So you don't have to go overboard. Okay, what about the difference between alliteration and rhyme? Those seem pretty similar.
They are related, but there's a key distinction. Alliteration is all about the beginning sounds of words, while rhyme is all about the end sounds. So blue and flew, that's rhyme.
Right, so beginning sounds versus end sounds. Got it.
Yeah.
What about assonance? Is that a type of alliteration?
It sounds similar, but it's a different technique. Alliteration is about those initial consonant sounds. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds within words that are close together, like smooth balloon. You hear that ooh sound repeated inside the words.
Oh, okay, so alliteration's at the front, assonance is in the middle, and rhyme is at the end.
You got it. That's a great way to remember it.
Now, one last question. Is alliteration just an old-fashioned thing? Do people still use it today?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely got a long history, but it's still very much alive and well in modern writing, in music, in advertising, even in everyday conversation.
So it's not just a literary relic.
Not at all. It's a timeless technique that writers can use in all sorts of creative ways.
And are there more subtle ways to use alliteration too? Like, can writers use it to create specific moods or feelings?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Skilled writers can use alliteration very subtly to enhance their work. They might use a series of soft, flowing sounds to create a sense of peace, or sharper, more percussive sounds to create tension or excitement.
It's amazing how much power those sounds can have.
Right, it's like a secret weapon for writers.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've really gone deep on alliteration. So just to sum up for our listeners, alliteration is the repetition of initial sounds in words that are close together.
And it's a technique that can add interest, memorability, and musicality to language.
And it's not just limited to books and poems. It's everywhere.
In advertising, in music, in our everyday conversations.
Exactly. So now that you know all about it, I challenge you to start paying attention to alliteration in the world around you. See if you can spot it in books, in songs, in commercials, even the things people say.
And maybe even try experimenting with it yourself. See how it can enhance your own writing and speaking.
It's a fun and powerful tool to have in your arsenal. All right, that's all for today's deep dive. We'll see you next time.